I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings, Arnold.
There's always a pecking order. The little packers never mess with the big packers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
Yeah, new world.
I seen two guys last night at the gym. I was working out late, and they were about in their 20s, you know. And
Yeah.
the one guy had his shirt off, and he just didn't have much of a physique. You know,
Right.
you could tell it was all about the social media aspect of it.
Right.
And they're filming each other with their phones, and they're over doing like just light cable curls, you know, nothing heavy duty. But it was all about, let's film this, let's put this on our social media, not about the workout. The workout was
Right.
there, you know. So it was all about the filming of it and promoting themselves on social media. So yeah, I mean, Frank Zane would be going crazy because I remember he wouldn't even talk to anybody back in the day. And these people are on their phones after every set. I mean, you know, Frank used to always talk about how the focus had to be there on the workout. And I remember Jerry Branham told me a story where Frank went to go get a drink at the water fountain. He was coming back, and Jerry asked him a question about low carbs. And Frank goes, "Make an appointment with me. Talk to me after the workout." You know, he just totally cut him off. And Jerry went crazy, he went nuts in it because I guess he was eating low carb diet, and he just lost his mind and he started screaming at Frank. But that's how Zane was, because Zane would not even talk to people, you know, during his workout because he wanted to stay so focused on the workout. And now these people are not only just talking to people, they're on their phones, they're watching YouTube videos, they're texting. I mean, their concentration is totally off, you know.
I can imagine Jerry losing it because him and Frank were neighbors. You know, it's not like I'm just a guy in the
That's why
gym.
he took it so personally, because Frank just cut him off.
Yeah.
You know, plus he was dieting on low carbs anyway, so he was on the edge. But
Yeah.
you know, he was so pissed that Frank wouldn't even talk to him. But that's how you have to look at Frank's point of view. That's how he looked at it. You know, he was just that focused, you know.
Yeah, it was his job. And again, getting back to like personalities, you know, there's guys with great physiques that maybe haven't competed ever or haven't competed in a long time, but they basically charge people to work out with them, and people do.
Yeah.
You know, so it's that's just another aspect. Could you imagine, like, you know, you were going for your natural Mr. Olympia, and you're training with 4 guys because you're charging them, and it's like, I don't know how you could concentrate.
No.
You know, they want to train with John Hansen, and you know, they're paying for it, but then you're like, well, I can't get my work done here.
Right. Or even filming the workouts. Like, how do you have a workout when you have to film it? You know?
Yeah.
I just want to focus on the workout. I don't want to film it unless you hire somebody to film it, I guess. You know, I guess that's how they do it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the movie, Mark. So you said that I didn't know that you saw the Bill Grant interview and he couldn't think of Larry Gordon's name. So then is that where the original idea for the movie came from?
Yeah, I'd been kicking around an idea for a while, to do something, a short documentary. And of course, I always thought, like, well, outside of bodybuilding and bodybuilders, who cares? You know, because I initially wanted to do something on Menser, and only because he was just such an interesting character. Yeah. And then reading about, I mean, it's just again, because it's an age thing, and people that weren't there or didn't know somebody, I'm always amazed at how flippantly they speak about people, you know, that they have. And it's like I probably told you before, I remember I call him the world on a string, Mike, you know, because he was Joe's golden boy. He became editor of Muscle, a muscle builder. He'd won the Mr. Universe. He was odds-on favorite to win the Olympia. And it was like, and then within a couple of years, you know, those things happen. And all of a sudden, you know, he's out of the limelight. He's dealing with some health issues. And, you know, people make flippant comments. So I thought, you know, that's kind of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a fall from grace. I think when people understand mental health, they'd be a bit more empathetic about it. But I'd kicked that idea around. And then it was like, yeah, probably a couple years later, more than a couple years later, when I saw your interview with Bill Grant, and Bill, you know, was talking about, you know, he lived off Wilshire, I think on 6th Street. And he goes, and I had, he goes, and it was funny because he says a lot of people thought he was Menser, because Larry Gordon, if you looked at Larry Gordon, looked like Mike Menzer with the glasses and the mustache and heavily muscled guy. And so I'm like, wait a minute, here's bodybuilding coming back into my life again. I was there, and I have the skills from the video production end of it, and then I have the experience of actually being there. I'll combine the two. And then again, it started initially as a shorter documentary about the 1977 Mr. America parade, and it just kind of grew from there. Because I kept getting interviews, and then it kept getting deeper and deeper. And one thing when I look at documentaries, or even TV programs, and people want to depict an era, and they'll use like the most popular, like they didn't really go too deep into research, right? Let's, whatever. They'll say, oh, let's go to the 80s and let's pull out a Madonna song or a Boy George song, and then get some fashion, and then we're done. And that really just bothers me when I'm like, you have to go deep if you really care, really care about your subject matter. And clearly I do. So it just got deeper and deeper with more guys. And I'm like, oh my God, the list is growing. It's gone from 5 to 10 to 13 to, I think I have to count my audio tracks. I think I've got 16 different interviews.
Okay.
And
who did you start with, Mark? Like Ken Sprague and Bill Grant, the guys who were on the parade.
Yeah, because it was initially about the 77 Mr. America parade. I'm like, okay, well, Ken was the owner of the gym. He organized the parade.
Right.
Bill Grant was in it. Ken Waller was in it. Dave Dupuis was in it. Rudy was in it. Tony Pearson was in it. So 5 of them I interviewed all at once up here in Northern California. I interviewed Tony in Las Vegas along with Wayne Gallish and Pete Samra, because I had contacted them, and Wayne's like, because I purchased the footage that Wayne had shot from the parade.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize Wayne shot some footage from the parade.
Yeah, he was there, and he shot some footage, and he says, I'm actually going to be in Las Vegas. And I said, well, Tony lives in Las Vegas. Pete Samra lived in Arizona. He was Pete won a couple of drug-free titles.
Yeah,
Pete,
I remember.
And he was a Gold's Gym manager, and he was actually the guy who signed me up when I officially joined as a member. And so those were kind of like, I think, the core 8. Some other guys, Kent Kuehn was a guy that wasn't sure, and then he says, okay, I'm ready. And then he called and he says, you know what, I'm having eye surgery and I don't want to be. I go, I get it, I totally get it. You don't, you wouldn't look good on camera and you'd probably be uncomfortable, so we'll wait. And then we waited, and then he changed his mind like a year later, and then sadly his health went down, and then he passed. So but then he
was a great guy. He was always very encouraging, and like you said, he encouraged you when you as a teenager. And he was, I've met people that said, oh, I remember writing Gold's Gym a letter, because Kent was in the magazines as well, right? He was over 40 Mr. USA, over 40 Mr. America, and it's kind of funny. We look back now, if you were in the magazines in that era and there was an article about you, it becomes immortalized, right? It just becomes. I was just thinking, I was down in Santa Monica a few weeks back, and I'm walking down the 3rd Street Promenade, and there's a building there that was the place where Ken Waller took Danny Padilla after Danny had won the amateur Mr. America, the AFAB. Right.
And
they went to eat.
Yeah, exactly. And when Danny was telling you, like, I never really went out and partied much, and I'm thinking, it shows you the power and the reach of the magazines, because if that was a one-time event, to you and I and all the millions of guys reading it, it was like, oh, Waller and Danny went out and all these guys and they partied, and it becomes immortalized. It lives forever.
Right.
It lives forever.
Like my interview with him, I said, so you went out and partied a lot with Ken Waller, right? And he goes, no, just that one time, because I didn't really go out and party. I'm like, because I was always thinking, oh, they were doing this all the time, because I read that one article. You're right. You find that out. I tried to get Danny,
But at the time, I think he's just like, I don't know who this guy is, or I don't remember this guy.
Yeah,
and
he was tough. He was tough for me to get to interview.
Was he? Yeah.
Literally years. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a shame because Danny was hilarious.
He's a great storyteller. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one time, at the end of the documentary, I have this photo of me in Golds. It appeared in Muscle Builder, and it's Joe Weider and Mike Menser in the foreground. And my friend Scott in New York a couple of years ago, he emails me and attached me. He goes, "Is this you?" And I looked at it and I'm like, "Oh my God, that's me." Like, holy cow. How did I miss that? I bought every Muscle Builder. I'm like, and I recognized some of the guys in the background standing around because we were all obviously all looking at Mike Menser and Joe Weider, and Craig Dietz took those photos, and they also took photos of Danny around the same time. But it's just, those things just stick with you. They just, they're immortalized forever.
Yeah. So at what point did you decide, well, I'm going to make this more about, the whole era instead of just the parade?
Yeah, I think when I got more guys involved, I reached out, I knew the history. So I reached out to guys. Some guys never answered. Some wanted to get paid. It was odd because, I knew Ric Drasin from World Gym, is where I met Rick in the late 70s. But at first he didn't want to be interviewed. And then when he saw a rough cut that I cut of the Gold's Gym t-shirt of Waller and Sprague talking about it, and then he emails me and he goes, "Where's my interview?" And I said, I've asked you, you're the guy that did it. So it kind of went like that.
Did you get to interview Rick?
Yeah. Rick, fantastic interview.
I think we ordered initially about half a dozen t-shirts. I thought, who would want a Gold's Gym t-shirt?
I came up to this area, which is Oakland, and I went to a bar, nightclub, or whatever, and there was a band up there called Mr. Clean and something. I said, "Get yourself a Mr. Clean bottle and make me a drawing of Mr. Clean with a barbell."
Here's how that happened. I had designed the Gold's Gym logo in 1973 on a napkin in Zucchi's Deli with Ken Waller and Arnold. I think Ken Sprague might have been there.
He gave an artist, Ric Drasin, a gym member, a Mr. Clean bottle. He says, "I want the t-shirt to look like this, except with a barbell."
So Rick made a bald-headed man look sort of like Mr. Clean with a lot more muscle, and he put a barbell in the middle of it, and the barbell was straight. I said, "Everything's good, Rick, except we're just going to bend the barbell." And that's where the original logo came from that we put on the Gold's Gym stuff.
Mr. Clean will clean your whole house and everything that's in it. Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean.
And sure enough, that goofy old Gold's Gym logo was born.
So they printed up all these shirts, maybe a dozen or two, and they sold them all out the first day.
Well, slowly we'd get letters from people around the country, "Can I buy one of those t-shirts?"
So they said, "We need more," and Ace Trophy started printing more.
And it built from there, and then thousands, by the time I sold, many thousands a month would be sold.
And so they started selling more and more, and it became, over the years, the largest selling logo in the world.
The way it was set up to promote it, I tell producers, if you need a place for a gym location, come on down to Gold's. Use the facility, free. Anytime you want to do a TV spot or a movie spot, you go ahead and use it. With one restriction, have to have a Gold's Gym t-shirt across the chest. And from that point on, that propelled it into the general public.
When I talked to Ken Sprague, he remembers it. He says, "I think you paid Rick $25 to draw that thing." I said, "I don't remember that at all."
I never got a dime for it. I just said, "Take it." I didn't realize this.
And I think when guys would start talking about the original gym, and they would start, it's like when someone references someone else, then you're like, now I have to go get that person. And when I spoke with John Balick, because I used to see John at Gold's Gym on Second. He was a photographer, and when John was talking about the summer he spent with Arnold, and it had to be like 72 or so when Gaines and Butler came out west, and pitched it to Arnold, and then my thought is, if I want to do this right, and I know how how important the book Pumping Iron was to our whole canon of history. That I'm going to have to try and approach George Butler and Charles Gaines. And of course, George Butler was, he's not in a condition, you know, he's ill and has been ill for many years. But Charles, I think you're the one, I think you told me, he's receptive again to speaking about it. Cause for a while he wasn't, is what I heard. And so Charles was wonderful. I'm like, okay, well, Charles is going to talk a lot about Arnold and Franco. And, because the initial was 77 and the parade, initially I wasn't going to ask Arnold anyway, because he was already retired and a member of World at that time. But, Rick says, I could get you Franco, and I'm glad I'm glad I did. I'm so glad I did. And,
so you got Ric Drasin, you got Franco, and both those guys have passed now. And since you started this project,
I know. Yeah, it's just really sobering. I remember talking to Rick when Franco had passed, because I'd actually texted Lynn Swanson, who was Franco's like press relations person. She kind of took care of all his business affairs. And I had texted Lynn because I heard on the internet that Franco had passed. And I'm like, I really don't believe it. I have Lynn's, I'll text her. And she's like, wish it wasn't true. We're here in Italy right now, and we've been at the hospital all day.
Wow.
So, I texted Rick, and then Rick and I spoke, I think the next day, and he's like, God, if that was one guy that I thought was going to live forever out of all of us, it would have been Franco, I mean, I was just thinking, I think when Rick interviewed me on Rick's Corner, and this was off camera, but I go, you know what? Franco grew up in Sardinia. He probably never even had sugar till he got to Germany. Like they said, he didn't even, he was just, just nothing but natural food, strong as a bear. Right. And just, that's why he was so, he could get so shredded. He just probably never had any sort of refined food base ever until he got to a bit further north in Europe.
He looked like that kind of physique too. He looked like he was just really hard and muscular all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So I got Charles Gaines, and then Manny.
What did Franco talk about, Mark, when you were talking to him? How far did you guys talk about, like, his whole story and everything?
I got the backstory of him, because there are some guys that I do weave it in. And I'm in my first rough cut, I'm like, okay, this is too long. This has got to be culled down. And I think Franco's backstory was initially maybe 2.5 minutes. And I'm like, I'm going to have to cut that down. Even though it's Franco, it's like, we really got to tighten these things up, because you're looking at the timeline and it's growing and growing. And I think right now the movie, it's without closing credits is almost 90 minutes. It's about an hour 20 something minutes. And that's me cutting out some stories, like, okay, what doesn't really move, what can kind of be boring to some people, because I kind of wanted to do it in a general audience sort of way, even though it's couched in bodybuilding. I wanted to kind of like bring in 1970s Southern California, Venice, Santa Monica, and the culture at large. And so I'm like, maybe some things will be on outtakes or something else. But Franco.
Are you in charge of the editing yourself, Mark?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm a one-man band, and that's another reason it's taken a long time is, I shot, I've had a couple people help me as a second camera person. I had a guy that I met, really nice guy named Dan Paralis, and he was head of the video department at an aviation company down in Southern California. So I finally get Pete Grimkowski and Manny Perry to say yes on the same weekend. So I fly down to Long Beach Airport, but before I do, I'm like looking for my camera. And I'm like, where's my camera? And my son, who was down in college in Santa Barbara, had it. And I'm like, great. But this is how things happen. I had this one guy had contacted me from Rick's Corner. It was a guy named Dan Paralis, and Dan's like, hey brother, we're the same age. He goes, I used to ride my bike to Gold's. I remember getting Roger Callard and Ken Waller's autograph. He goes, I used to see him play handball out at the weight pit.
Yeah.
And he told me what he did. And he goes, if you ever need help. I said, as a matter of fact, Dan, I kind of do. And he's like, no problem. He goes, I have a couple cameras, I have monitors, I have lights. So that one to me was a joy because one, he was just a great guy and an absolute pro. And I was like, I can't reschedule, Pete's not going to say yes again. Manny's busy.
Right.
And so it was better than I could imagine. It was like, sometimes the angels come forth.
Yeah. That's crazy.
So, and then I'm trying to think, I think those were probably my last two, and maybe Franco after that. Because we had to wait for Franco to get back from Italy when Lynn said.
What year did you interview Franco?
It was 2018 because he died in 2019.
Yeah, a year later.
And it was, in fact, it was August of 2018. And my friend Scott was
died right around his birthday, didn't he?
Yeah, to almost a year to the day later. Yeah. Okay. And there was a time when I thought Arnold was going to get involved. I was speaking to a couple guys over at Oak Productions, but you just realized they just kind of like, placate people. I'm sure I was probably getting vetted behind the scenes too, where it was like, oh, this is a tiny project, I'm not going to get involved in that. Exactly. So you understand that. But I think
at this point wants to talk about bodybuilding anymore. Or do you think he's on to other things? Like I know he's a big advocate of the climate control and stuff like that.
Yeah, and he's got the Schwarzenegger Institute for I think political and social studies at USC, where a few of his kids went to USC. I know one went to Georgetown, but I've been told, because John Balick was talking to Lynn Marks, who was Arnold's longtime assistant. Like Lynn's been with him since like the Stay Hungry days in a different capacity. And John's like, Mark, it's the history. I think Arnold needs to be involved. I haven't spoken. He goes, I haven't spoken to him since before, but I know Lynn, and maybe Lynn can get some clips to him. So Lynn saw it, and she goes, I sent some clips, and I went heavy on the Franco interview. To try and jog the sentimental part. And Lynn got back to John and I and said, I find it very interesting, but the governor doesn't want to talk about those days anymore.
Oh man.
And that's I'll tell you off camera, off the interview, what transpired after that, but I'm kind of sworn to secrecy, just out of respect to some other producers that are working on another project. But I think, who can blame them? It's we look at the phone. It's like when we listen to music, and we always think that artist is going to be, the Beatles are always going to be Sgt. Pepper, but it's like people get older, people pass away. Same with any rock group or anything, or it's even a celebrity. When you see them out in public and people go, "Wow, you got old." It's like, well, you're looking at a film that's 40-something years old. I'm human. I'm going to get older too.
Right.
And I think Arnold, it's like been there, done that, a million times. And when
I think about, I understand, but I just wish Arnold would do an interview about bodybuilding because. We're seeing all these people pass away, Ed Corney, Franco, Ric Drasin, all the time. They're just passing away. I wanted to get Jimmy Caruso on the podcast, because I heard he was still operating his gym in Montreal, but I knew he had to be super old because he looked old in his 70s, And I guess in his 95, I think he was. Yeah. And then I heard he just passed away. I'm like, man, this happens all the time to me on this podcast. I try to get these people, then I hear they pass away, and it's just so frustrating.
Yeah, it is.
Because when they die, their stories die with them, And you can know, obviously we all know the history of Arnold, but I'd like to hear the stories from Arnold, his point of view,
Right, exactly. Yeah, what happened that day at the Germans? What happened the day they were laying out? What happened? I'll tell you one story. I have it on. It's not in the movie, but Franco was recounting a time that. And this was previous to any of Arnold's bigger movies. He'd already done Stay Hungry and obviously The Doc Pumping Iron. Yeah. But Dino DeLaurentis they were at his office in Beverly Hills, and Dino DeLaurentis had said, yeah, and he was European, so you'd think he'd be a bit more open to Arnold and the fact that he had an accent and a quote unquote funny name.
Yeah.
But he said, you're not right for this part. Like, who are you joking? Go back to the gym. And he goes, I saw Arnold just like lose it. Like he just like stood up and like, who are you to speak to me like that, you tiny little man? And Franco was laughing as he's telling the story. He's like, he goes, Arnold, he goes, I didn't know what, I thought he was going to pick up the desk and throw it out the window on Wilshire Boulevard. He goes, that was like the side of Arnold that I think he got really better at playing his cards close to the vest, but I'm sure at some point you're like, I'm just so tired of being second guessed and doubted and discounted, and I'll show all of you,
Right.
But that was funny, because Franco was laughing as he was remembering it. He goes, I thought, DeLaurentis turned white as a sheet. He goes, I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there in the chair.
Yeah, the story I heard was that Dino never met Arnold, and I read this in a couple of books about Arnold, that his agent brought Arnold into a meeting with Dino DeLaurentis.
Right.
And Dino DeLaurentis was a little guy, and he was sitting behind this huge desk like in The Godfather,
Right.
And the first thing Arnold said was, why does such a little guy need such a big desk?
Yeah.
And then Dino DeLaurentis had never heard Arnold talk. So then he heard the accent, and he goes, you have an accent. You can't be flat, because he was supposed to be Flash Gordon. He was trying to.
Right. Oh, okay. That was a
Flash Gordon, not Conan. And he goes, how are you going to be Flash Gordon with an accent? And Arnold goes, I have an accent. I can't even understand what you're saying. And that was it. The meeting was over in like 2 minutes. And they're walking out, and the agent told him, he goes, you just fucked up your whole career. And Arnold's like, no, it'll be fine. Sure enough, it was.
Yeah. Wow. Once Balick had mentioned Gaines, and that opened up that, then I knew it had to grow.
That's pretty much how far you start with them, Mark, right? You start with, Charles Gaines and, the whole Venice Beach scene in the early 70s.
Right. And actually, because, guys like Rick and Bill Grant, Ken Sprague, Ken Waller, and Arnold, and Charles, and not Charles, but Dave Dupree, when they talk about the early gym, they even go prior to when Charles Gaines had come out in 72. So even though that's kind of like a kicking off point, there is some references to at least the late 60s when all those guys had come out for the first time.
Yeah.
Rick had come down from Bakersfield. Ken had come out from Cincinnati. Waller had come out from Kentucky. Actually, I think he came down from Canada because he was up there with the Toronto Argonauts.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Trying out, for Canadian football. And he's just like, he goes, when I started getting paid, or I was going to get paid to play pro football, he goes, it wasn't fun anymore. He goes, and I didn't know if I really wanted to do that. And
that was the football team that Lou Ferrigno tried out for too, right?
That's right, the Argonauts. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How was Ken Waller to talk to? Because I'm sure he had a ton of stories. I mean, being the manager of Golds and hanging out with Arnold. Ken was he's a great guy. I mean, he's very, very private and incredibly private. He did send me a photo a few months back when there was some flooding in Alabama, because that's where he's living now, along the Gulf Coast. And he says, I'm fine, but this kind of happened near where I'm at. But yeah, he had all those guys, had some great stories. And they're like, it's like, walking through Venice back then, there wasn't a whole lot of people around, and a lot of people don't realize it. Native Los Angelinos, or they'd stay away from Venice. They'd be in Santa Monica, but they're like, I'm not going south of Rose Avenue on Main Street, because things get scary pretty quick, especially back then. But they were, they scared people just by their appearance. It's like Sprague had said it, and Waller had said it. He goes, there was a biker gang clubhouse that was in a house for a while right next to the original Golds, and he says, and they were scared of us. It's like they would be walking down the street, and then when they got like close to Golds, they would cross the street and walk across. Wow, really?
Yeah. And Franco said it too. He goes, we would be out front, and we'd come out to get some air, after working out and getting pumped, and they would like look at us. He goes, and they were all dressed up in their chains and their knives hanging and their belts. He goes, and they looked at us like, God, stay away from those guys.
Right.
So
yeah, because bodybuilders weren't well known back then. I mean, nobody had muscles back then,
No reference point for someone the size of Ken Waller or Dave Dupree or
right.
Bill Grant, Arnold. Yeah.
Lifting all those heavy weights and everything. That'd be crazy.
Yeah.
So how's the movie? The movie is finished, right, Mark?
It is finished, and right now, and I'm QCing it. So I'm going, quality checking, making sure that I've got my color correction and my sound mixing that I would have liked to got done professionally by someone who does nothing but sound design or someone who does color correction. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to do the best job I can. So I'm checking the lower thirds, the titles, make sure everything's spelled correctly. And then I'm going to have to add the closing credits. But after that, then it's purchase the errors and omissions insurance and then upload it to the other Venice Film Festival in Venice, California, and see if it gets accepted. And then enter it in some other ones. And then go from there, see if it garners any sort of interest. And then if not, I will, upload it to Amazon or iTunes, Vimeo, probably behind a paywall. And kind of self-distribute, just like how people, you do your podcasts or people put out their own music on SoundCloud or something. It's a whole new ball game. So, I'm hoping to get some interest. Obviously, I poured a lot of time and effort and money into it. Yeah.
Alex Ardente did that with his, do you see his Sups movie? SUP?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's selling
yes, I did.
On Amazon.
Yeah. Alex and I were, he's taken photos of both my son and daughter, her for like a modeling portfolio.
Oh, okay.
He's a teenager, and then my son for his IMDb page because he's a film major, and so he wanted some professional shots for his IMDb page, and then Alex and I were actually in a meeting together last October down in Venice, speaking to the head of marketing for Gold's Gym because I wanted to see if there was interest in them investing in the movie. I'm like, this is your guys' history.
Yeah.
And this, if you want to rebuild the brand, this is, I think, if I do say so myself, a pretty good movie about Gold's Gym that will only help you guys.
Yeah.
And then Alex was in the meeting too, because he was hoping to get to be kind of like the house videographer for him, making content, training films or whatnot. And Ed Connors had set up that meeting for us. So Rainer Schaller, who owns Gold's, he's the German guy that bought Gold's.
Okay.
He was in the meeting with Ed's meeting, and then a guy named Yus was head of marketing, and he met with Alex and I. But it was it was kind of a strange meeting. I mean, a nice guy, but it just seemed kind of like an odd meeting, like they didn't have any interest. But I was thinking, okay, well, you guys called the meeting, not us, so it just
they didn't go for it. They're not going to help sponsor, or they're not going to help invest in it.
No, they had said that they had that they were working on their own documentary, which is totally understandable. And I think when I found that out, first thing I did when I got home, I was down in Venice, and I drove down, and so I had to drive back up to Northern California, and the first thing I did was I got online to Library of Congress and uploaded rough cut of my movie and had it copyrighted, just to protect myself.
Yeah, sure.
It's like, okay, it's Library of Congress. Here's the title. Here's the content of it, even though it's in rough cut form, and I'm covered, that way. So
have you had investors, Mark, or has this been all out of you?
No, well, I had a life coach, a gentleman named Mike Murphy, and he helped give me the initial seed money to fly guys out and get them interviewed, rent a studio, and he also, he lives in Colombia part of the year, and so he's down in Colombia. He runs something called Mountains of Hope, and it's a meditation center, but it's also a place where women who are dealing with cancer and don't have the funds to take care of their care or get care. So, and then he owns a couple of car dealerships that his sons run, but he's done a lot. I mean, all I can say is, anything that he gave me, this project would have never gotten off the ground without that. And that's when it became a real project, because I all of a sudden had some money to write checks and get guys out, because you have to put them up in a hotel for a couple of days, fly them out, feed them. So, and then beyond that, it's been just, myself, what I could do by myself, or money I could pull out. And then of course, like with the GoFundMe, some, people have been kind enough to send some money in, and that will be used for the insurance.
Yeah. Now, what is that errors and omissions? You mentioned that a couple of times. The insurance for errors and omissions. Yeah,
it's like, when you watch a movie and you see credits, and then you'll see like at the end it'll say like insurance. You're like, what the heck? And it's there's obviously insurance for people that get injured or hurt or, God forbid, killed on set. But then there's also errors and omissions insurance that is basically to protect yourself against misstatement of facts or slander, libel, anything like that, or people that will say, oh, you know what, I didn't give you permission to use my image, but that's why you have release forms, because everyone in the movie that I've interviewed obviously knew they were being interviewed and signed a release form. But you just never know. I mean, when I was going over this with my lawyer, and he's like, yeah, it's funny. He says, I've had cases where someone will say, well, that's a picture of me sitting on the credenza behind that person. It's like a little tiny, but someone will do that, and so it's, you got to cover yourself.
Yeah. So. That's interesting. I wonder if Pumping Iron had, did they have investors, or did they just fund that themselves?
No, they did. They there was a guy named
company, right? White Mountain Films that did it, right?
Yeah, there's a gentleman named Jerome Gary.
Yeah, I remember.
And yeah, and he I don't know if Dave McVeigh may have mentioned him in your interview, but he was a guy in California that was like, you're talking middle 70s. He was like the waterbed king. He had made his money that way is what I understood. Yeah. And but he wanted to get in films, and so he was one of the guys that Butler was able to recruit and get some seed money. And then of course you've also heard the story where George Butler said I was probably the most important person to American Express because they called me 50 times a day.
Because I remember how much he was charging for that. And then they did the thing at the Whitney Museum to try to get some money to fund it, because they were behind. Right. And that helped. And that was another thing, I think, because obviously it's about the 75 contest, but the movie wasn't finished or released till 77. Yeah, January 77, right? Yeah. And Charles Gaines had told me too that George's mother-in-law helped kick in some money. Yeah. And I don't know how much, but it was like, he goes, it was almost like the book, where Charles said, even though he was a published author and had won awards and whatnot, he goes, to do that sort of book, no one was going to publish it. They're just like, you can do anything but that. Yeah. Don't do that. Right. And like he said, he goes, it was almost, I'd given up on it because I just got tired of being told no by people that I had connections with. Yeah. And he said it was kind of like for George, the same thing with the movie, because even though Charles wrote the book, George made the movie of the book. Yeah. But he said, yeah, it's like, after a couple of years, you're thinking, wow, is this ever going to happen? Because we just kept getting doors slammed in our face. And it's unbelievable because it was such a great book. The photos are great and the writing was great. And it was about a difference. I mean, I know the subject was probably considered weird, bodybuilding, but they covered it so well and they did such a great job with it. I can't believe, a publisher wouldn't say, wow, let's take a chance on this, Yeah. Yeah. And I know, they both had connections in publishing. Yeah. George was he may have already done a couple of other documentaries. I'm not sure. And then Charles wrote Stay Hungry, which won some book award, right? Like book award of the year or something. Yeah. He won like his very first novel. He won an award. Yeah. And he had also, he was a freelance writer writing for Argosy magazine, Field and Stream, Sports Illustrated, Vanity Fair.
a lot of big magazines. So it wasn't like he was
And
just.
then they decided to make a movie out of his book. I mean, how often does that happen?
I know, and twice.
Yeah, right.
I don't think anybody knows how to account for that. A big part of it was due to George Butler's untiring efforts to publicize it. And he did things like, we started taking Arnold into Elaine's, which was like, bringing a bull into a china shop, really. It was a famous literary restaurant in New York at that time, where all the movie stars hung out. Everybody who was anybody in New York hung out at Elaine's at one point or another. And he charmed himself into it. He was never uncomfortable. It didn't matter who you brought in. You could bring in a senator from Nebraska or the vice president of the United States or anybody. Arnold was going to get along with him and charm him.
Arnold would be just as comfortable sitting with a storefront pastor in Watts as across the table from the Pope. Makes no difference. In his mind, there is no difference. They're just two people.
I took Kurt Vonnegut, the wonderful American novelist, and his wife, Jill Crimmins, who was a great photographer, and Terry Bradshaw, the football player, and a whole group of people from Elaine's one night to a bodybuilding competition. The first one they'd ever seen. And so bodybuilding got to be chic all of a sudden. It got to be hot. It was a hot topic in New York. So that had a lot to do, I think, with the success of the book, because by the time the book actually came out, he was already a minor celebrity on his way to becoming a major celebrity in New York. The buzz that it had created around Arnold and the heat that it created helped to make it a bestseller right out of the blocks. Second week it came out, it got on the bestseller list and stayed on it forever.
Yeah, that's been the financial situation on it. So, and Charles had told me one time, because I'll keep in contact with them and via email, but he's like, if you finish, you win. I know that's easy for me to say.
Yeah.
Because things, obviously a couple things that he'd done, he goes, that I never thought I'd ever be associated with or thought would ever amount to anything. Bodybuilding, where he, did really well with the book Pumping Iron. And then he was actually with his friend, the co-creator of Paintball. And he goes, and all of a sudden I'm getting this big, gigantic check written to me, because this thing had taken off, people doing paintball. He goes, and those are two things I didn't wake up and when I was a writer at, University of Iowa Masters of Fine Arts workshop, thinking I was going to be the creator of Paintball to write a book about bodybuilding. It's like,
right.
And those were, two things that contributed a lot to his life.
Yeah. So the GoFundMe thing you have going on now, that's to help pay for the insurance and get this thing finally finished. Yeah.
Right. If there's any gravy left over from the insurance, which the insurance runs a little over $4,000. I'm probably at about high 3,000s now for the fundraiser. Then anything else will probably go into what I can get done color correction wise or audio mixing. But I kind of have a feeling that I'll be doing that. I mean, I've been doing it as I've been combing through it. I'm just okay. Every time I make a pass through the movie, and Alex had told me this, he says, he goes, when I was getting my movie ready for, I think it was iTunes or Amazon, he said, and it's like, oh my God, I've seen this movie like 500 times. How did I miss that? He goes, and there'd be like some little, flash frame of black or a missed transition or something. He's like, and I know the feeling, because I'm like the other night I had changed the font on the lower thirds, the identifiers for the guys, and I'm going through checking to make sure they're spelled correctly and they say what I want them to say. And I'm like, oh, there's a couple that I forgot that are still in the old font. How did I miss that? I've been combing through this, myriad amount of times, so.
I'll put the link for the GoFundMe on this video, and then the descriptions below. So hopefully people will help contribute.
Yeah, I'll send a few outtakes too that you could cut into the interview if you want. Yeah.
So when is the Venice Film Festival then?
It is October 1st through 3rd, and I have to have it submitted by middle of September. Is the late submission. So, it's finished now and just have to get the closing credits and keep QCing. And then and then upload it and hope for the best, you know.
Are there any other film festivals you're looking at too, Mark?
You know, I haven't, only because just given COVID over the past year where things have been canceled, or the time frame, I've just been focused on this one. And then also too, just because of the work, the location, it just seems like a perfect.
Yeah, perfect fit. You got
yeah, yeah. Although I don't know if you've ever interviewed James Hergott. He did the movie From Fat Lolly to Six Pack Lolly, but James is he's done some films, and he's a fitness expert and very well built guy, MMA. He might be a good interview. But he had told me, he says, you know, he goes, there were some film festivals that I thought my movie would be perfect for that I got turned down. He goes, and there were other ones that I sent in, like, they're never going to call me, and they got accepted. He said, so you know, as much sense as it would make for Venice to accept it, you know, because it kind of, yeah. He goes, you know, you just never know. I'm not saying that to dissuade you. You know, obviously enter it as many times as you can, wherever you want. He goes, but just be. He goes, life's funny that way, you know. Yeah. So.
What about the big ones like Sundance and like Tribeca, and you know, the one, I think those are in the beginning of the year though, aren't they usually? Yeah.
And you know, I've been so focused on just getting this thing out. You know, it's I was talking to Chris Bell, who did Bigger, Stronger, Faster, and Prescription Thugs, and Trophy Kids, and you know, he's like he said, he goes, my first movie, which was Bigger, Stronger, Faster, he said, I was lucky. I had a crew, I had a budget, I had a crew. Yeah. And he goes, I didn't have to worry about chasing down the insurance. There was someone for that. He goes, I had someone who he goes, I would edit, but then there was like the finishing editor, the online editor. Yeah. He goes, the people doing the music score. There were the people checking on the clearance on the music and on the film clips. You know, so he goes, I didn't have to worry about any of that, you know, and so I you know, I go, that's great to have. I hope to have that for my next film. You know, but he goes, but another thing too, he goes, and then depending on the film festival, he goes, you need representation. You know, they're not going to take a submission unless you have a talent agent. So it's like, if this is your first film, you know, and I know Netflix doesn't take any films unless you're going through a lawyer that has an established contact with Netflix. They don't just take unsolicited submissions.
Yeah, otherwise they take millions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, everyone would upload.
Yeah, right. Wow.
So
okay, well, hopefully I'm gonna try and get out there to Venice and see that. I'd love to go to the film festival with you. And
no, that'd be great. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, right. Because this has been a labor of love for you for what now, 6 years, right?
Oh yeah. If you had told me that when I started, I probably wouldn't have started.
Yeah, right.
You know.
Well, best of luck to you, Mark, and great job on finally coming to the end. And like Charles Gaines said, you won because you finished it. So
that's it.
I can't wait to see it, and hopefully it'll get a really good reception from the bodybuilding world. You know.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, thank you, John.
Well, thanks for joining me on the Bodybuilding Legends podcast, and we'll stay in touch, and I'll let everybody know when this thing is coming out. Dream Big is the name of the movie, and we're all looking forward to seeing it. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thank you, John.
All right.